Yep.
Okay, so this is just a debrief on the working the flame scenario that we just did. So I don't know, maybe I'll just open it up to you guys on a bit of feedback on how I went as a mediator.
I think it went pretty well. I don't think it was like very super duper obvious. I think there were times where maybe you overstepped your boundary as being, you know, a little bit impartial, just a little bit. It wasn't much, but there were times where, you know, as someone that's not the mediator, it felt like it was being overstepped just a little bit. You know, again, wasn't super obvious, but there were just little things where you might have said something, or like, I guess, at least for me, how I see a mediator role is you're not necessarily giving a lot of advice or suggestions. You're just there to help flow the conversation, help flow things. You might help try and make people go, you know, help flow the conversation down a certain path and keep people on track. But I think sometimes might have just stepped out of that role just a little bit.
Yep, I can understand where you're coming from with that. I think what I was trying to put into it is a fair bit of reframing.
I could see that.
You were both coming at each other with just negative. I was just trying to use a little bit of reframing, and I guess it could have come off or be perceived that way.
Yeah.
You did mention once, I agree with you. So I was like, you agree with me. Once you said, oh, I agree with you, I was like, oh, okay, maybe not so sure if that goes around should be said or not.
I think it was those little things where, you know, as a mediator, you're not necessarily agreeing with one side or the other, and you're not necessarily giving straightforward advice. More towards the end where you were like, okay, I see, this is kind of the conclusion we're bringing, this is kind of the conclusion we're bringing, you know, or saying things like, are you open to this kind of, like, that's kind of, I feel like, where you were doing good, but obviously, you know, not agreeing with people and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess I could have chosen better terms than agreeing with the person. I think what I was trying to achieve there is just to make sure that the person felt that they were heard, if you know what I mean. Rather than actually agreeing with them. And
I think, like, again, you could just use terminology, you know, just being like, yep, I hear you, you know, or like, thank you, you know, I hear where you're coming from, you know, that's you know, that kind of stuff. Just making sure that they're being heard without saying things that might seem like you're agreeing with them. And I think that can be difficult. You know, this obviously isn't something that we do all the time. We're not trained mediators, so it can be something that's hard to do.
Yes, I understand that statement that I agree with you does make the mediator a little bit biased in a sense.
And I mean, the other thing is, like, this is a mediation that, compared to some of the others, is still quite in the formal territory. It's about a company. There's potential losses that might be happening. There's clientele. A lot of the other mediations are, you know, family situations, friend situations, you know, even something informal in a workplace, whereas this is a lot more formal with a lot, I would say, higher stakes than some of the other mediations. So,
definitely. I
feel like it has a different way of flowing as well. But I think you did pretty good overall.
But I think there's also a personal touch to it. Like, it's obvious in the scenario both parties are very passionate about this business and what they're doing. So although it's a corporate, more formal sort of thing, there is a little bit of personal side to it, if you know what I mean.
And I mean,
I'm not,
you're right, you can go.
My view was just not knowing your side. I don't know if it's beneficial or not, because you came up with stuff and I was just like, oh, okay, I don't know where to go. I don't know if I agree or not with knowing the other one's side, because if you were in a real situation, I'll probably knew about a lot more
Yeah, I can see where that comes from. That was just what I had heard. I could be wrong. We can go and double check that. But I think it's almost done intentionally because there's certain feelings and certain things that the other party feels that the other person isn't necessarily supposed to know. So when it's brought up, there's those little things like, this is how I felt. And like, well, I didn't know that's how you felt, you know, so it's kind of supposed to bounce off each other like that. Like, that's why you have the conflict scenario where you all know what's happened, but the individual circumstances are slightly different.
I think the purpose of that may be just to keep the one person focused on their side of the story.
So they don't become like biased or something by another side. Because as outside parties, we're still reading scenarios. So we might read someone else's and be like, oh, but I kind of side more with that person's side of the story. So I think it's partially, like you said, to help us keep on track of like what we're reading so that we don't read someone else's and go, oh, but I kind of agree with the one that's not what I'm reading, you know. So you might be less willing to kind of talk and be harsh with things if you know that you personally agree more with another scenario, like the other person's
perspective. It was a scenario that was kind of tough for me to remain impartial with, because I did kind of identify with Greg's side of the story, maybe a little bit more than I did with Theo's side of the story. So when you know both sides of the story, it is a little bit hard to remain impartial.
And I think that's part of what makes it difficult. Like, there's a lot of, like, when I was reading through a lot of the friendship ones, and even the one that I wrote myself, there is someone that I know who I would side with. And a lot of these friendship ones, you're like, well, I know who I would side with. Like, the other person has clearly done something that I don't like. But the point of the mediation is to try and keep that impartialness and to try and have these two separate parties. So I think the point of not knowing what the other person has is to try and have that ability to bounce off of each other in a mediation.
Definitely. All right, well, unless you guys have got anything else to add there, we can probably wrap it up.
Good.
I think we're going to wrap up the recording now.
Thanks very much for the feedback, guys. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, of course.
Okay, cheers. Thank you. Bye.